ILTV Plus, your news from Israel and more 24/7. Start your free trial today. Subscribe at ILTV.tv and watch from any device. Now joining me with more on the alleged Israeli assassination of Midhat A-Saleh in Syria, senior analyst with the Abba-Eban Institute at the IDC Herzliya, IDF Major in Reserves, Danny Citrinowicz. Major, thanks so much for being with us. Now, who was Midhat A-Saleh and what made him an allegedly prime target for Israel?
Well, in order to understand who was Saleh, let's go a little bit back to what really Hezbollah and Iran are trying to accomplish in the Golan Heights. And actually, the true meaning or their aim to build a second front against the state of Israel. So in the case of a war between Israel and Hezbollah, they were able to ease the tension on Hezbollah by opening a second front with Syria. Now, in order to build this kind of capability, they need local forces. The modus operandi of Iran in Ramat Golan and Syria and the Middle East as a whole is working with local forces, in order to use them to build this kind of capabilities. And in such, Midhat A-Saleh was one of those guys who were the connector between Iran and Hezbollah and local forces at Golan Heights, trying to build those terror cells that will play a role and will help Iran and Hezbollah efforts in this region.
Okay, but A-Saleh was apparently operating to this capacity for quite some time, and he was actually living in the area in which he was killed. So why now? Why did this strike only happen now?
I think that Israel is extremely annoyed from things that are developing in the Golan Heights. Now, in the last several years, Israel is waging a campaign, what we call in Hebrew Mabam, or short of war campaign, to really try to eradicate the presence of Hezbollah and Iran in Syria. But this campaign has glass ceiling in a way, and Israel is really trying to intensify its activity to signal the Iranians, to Hezbollah, and especially to the Syrian regime, that the patient is coming to an over. So I think this event is really signaling some sort of a change in Israeli policy towards the Golan Heights and towards the presence of Hezbollah and Iran activity in the Golan Heights. I don't know how it will continue into the future, but if it will intensify, then we'll see more activities like that. And maybe Israel will try to aim Hezbollah and Syrian forces in the Golan Heights, helping Iran to entrench its forces or its capabilities in that strategic area.
All right, now I want to move away from A-Saleh for a bit, because this is far from the only strike that Israel has been attributed, in Syria in recent, as of late. The Israeli Air Force has also been accused of, the Israeli Air Force has been accused of hitting pro-Iran targets in Syria, killing 9 just last week. But what was upsetting most about that attack is that Russia is saying that Israel used civilian airliners to conduct that strike, ostensibly using them as human shields. What do you say to such accusations?
Israel is indeed trying to, like I mentioned, to eradicate Hezbollah presence all over Syria. It's not only Golan Heights, and like the eastern part of Syria, like happened last week. I think those Russian accusations that are not new, they're signaling also from Moscow part that their tolerance regarding these attacks maybe come to a limit. Now, I don't say that in the future they will prevent that, but I think Israel needs to take it into consideration. When planning future attacks, they need to really understand, to assess Moscow retaliation to that, because for Moscow, the most important thing right now is stabilizing Bashar al-Assad's presidency. And those attacks, in Moscow's eye, does not help this cause. That's why I think that the Mabam of between the wars is extremely important, but in the end of the day, can cause a friction between Israel and Russia, and that, I think, need to be in the calculus of Israel if and when they continue striking those.
But are you suggesting then that Russia is essentially making this up in order to, to what end? Is Israel? Do you think that there's any truth to the accusation that Israel used a civilian flight as cover for these attacks?
No, of course not. But for the Russian, it's a good excuse to explain why Israel is succeeding. Because this is also extremely important to know that for Russia, the fact that Israel attacking and the Syrian air defense that actually equipped with Russian equipment is not able to stop those attacks, this is embarrassing to Russia. So in order to find ways to excuse that, or to find excuses to Russian incompetency, they think that Israel attacking via the use of civilian aircraft. Of course, it's a blunt lie, but again, this is really annoying from the fact that we need to see whether there is a change in Moscow view regarding Israel attacks in Syria, because such a change can have a dramatic influence on Israel to operate freely in Syria. So I think that although it's, of course, it's lies, at the end of the day, we need to see whether those lies really signal some sort of a change regarding Moscow policy in light of Israeli attacks in Syria.
All right, now, Major, I'll be back with you in just a moment. But first, I want to change gears actually towards Lebanon.